all those who've gone astray, and to the prodigals there is a banquet. All those cast aside, all those filled with pride, and to the longing hearts there is a banquet. Your invitation is written in His blood, and it says your name. Welcome home. You're no longer alone. The only safe place is in the kingdom. Welcome home. Your family feasts before the throne. The only way to be saved is with the King and His kingdom. The King and His kingdom. All those who've given up, all those who've had enough, and to the tired and weak there is a banquet. All those who think their sin is too big to be forgiven, all those with hurt and scars, there is a banquet. Your invitation is written in His blood, and it says your name. Welcome home. You're no longer alone. The only safe place is in the kingdom. Welcome home. Your family feasts before the throne. The only way to be saved is with the King and His kingdom. The King and His kingdom. You cannot buy a bribe. You can't even work to strive. The only way in is to be born again. Welcome home. You're no longer alone. The only safe place is in the kingdom. Welcome home. Your family feasts before the throne. The only way to be saved is with the King and His kingdom. The King and His kingdom.
Hi, I'm Chris Bray. Thanks for joining me. One of the teachings of Catholicism that is really difficult for a lot of Christians to understand and to accept is the teaching of the papacy, the office of the Pope. And a lot of people ask the question, why do I have to listen to the Pope? Where is the Pope in the Scriptures? Why would I have to submit myself to the authority of some old man in Rome? And I think when we understand the significance of this beautiful gift, we recognize what it truly is a gift of Christ instituting this office for us so that we can have a sure way to know truth, so that we can be led to a transformation and to a deeper fullness of God's truth that He has for us. See, God's covenants, they are really a family relationship. That word pope, it's a Latin word which means father. It's a covenantal family relationship as Christ is building His kingdom and instituting His church. And we see the significance as we examine the Scriptures that perhaps many have overlooked. And we start in Matthew 16, starting around verse 13. It says, when Jesus went into the region of Caesarea Philippi, He asked His disciples, who do they say that the Son of Man is? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, some others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And He said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter said in reply, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said to him in reply, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. And so I say to you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This is a really significant moment. I think a lot of people perhaps overlook the significance of this passage because Jesus is taking his disciples. He's taking them on a journey way out of the way off the track, and he's taking them to the region where it says Caesarea Philippi. Now, in Caesarea Philippi, there's this giant rock. I'm sitting on a small rock, but there's a huge rock in Caesarea Philippi where people would come and they would offer sacrifices to a pagan idol, to a false pagan god. And Jesus makes a point of taking his disciples way out of the way to this giant rock in Caesarea Philippi. Second, once he's there, he asks them the question. He says, well, who do people say that I am? And they start giving some answers. Well, some say Elijah and John the Baptist and then Jeremiah. And, they don't really know how to answer his question. But Jesus changes it. He says, no, who do you say that I am? And this is really a question as we read through the Gospels. This is a question that Jesus really asks us. Who is Jesus to us? And this should really resonate with us on our transformation and on our journey to heaven. So, who is Jesus in our life? Is he just some crazy lunatic that was making all of this stuff up? Was he a liar? Or is he the Lord of our life? He's asking us this question, who am I to you? Third, Peter receives this special revelation from God. All the other disciples are offering these suggestions. Well, some say this and some say that. And Peter alone, Simon Peter pipes up and he says, you are the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus praises Peter for this answer. He says, Peter, blessed are you, Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. See, this is important for us because Jesus calls him Simon. I think this is often overlooked. When Jesus first meets Peter, his name isn't Peter. His name is Simon. And Jesus renames Simon to Peter. Now at the time, Peter wasn't a name that we can find revealed to us through historical sources. It was a feminine noun. It meant rock. That's what it meant. It would be like the equivalent of coming up to someone and saying like, oh, hey, your name's John. I'm going to rename you to Tree Trunk, or something ridiculous like this, right? So Jesus renames Simon, gives him a new name, a new title. He gives him Peter, rock. And as he's speaking with him, Simon Peter gets this special revelation that none of the other apostles received. He says, you are the Messiah, the Christ. And he says, blessed are you, Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. But then the very next sentence he says, you are Peter. Not Simon, you are Peter. Peter means rock. You are rock. And upon this rock, I'm going to build my church. We see this beautiful, poetic play on words. It's hard for us to grasp this when we're reading a translation of a translation, but we can see that, wow, Jesus is doing something really significant here. He's building a church upon the rock of Peter. Now, we have a lot of modern day arguments against this. We see, people saying, well, in the Greek, Jesus refers to Peter as Petros, but then he calls the rock Petra, and so there's some distinguishing there. See, he's contrasting the two. Really, these arguments, ultimately, they're silliness. When we examine the grammar of the Greek, the noun is feminine for rock, is Petra, but Peter is a man. And so you can't call Peter a feminine noun. In order for this to be grammatically correct, we would need to have the proper grammar. You need to call the rock Petros the masculine form. And this is what we see happening in this. But ultimately, none of this even really matters because Jesus and the apostles spoke Aramaic. The only way that Jesus could have said this aloud was, you are Cephas, and on this Cephas I will build my church. This is the words that Jesus gives as he builds his church upon the rock of Peter. He gives us this promise. He says, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. This is the confidence that we can have in the church that Christ institutes, the church that he builds upon the rock of Peter, that the gates of hell will not prevail against it, that this church will be a holy church, that this church will not be led into error and go astray or ever be overcome. And he says to him, you, Peter, singularly, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. There is significance packed into this passage. As Jesus is echoing these words from Isaiah chapter 22, he's stating them almost verbatim, where it says this, I will thrust you from your office and pull you down from your station, and on that day I will summon my servant Eliakim. I will clothe him with your robe, gird him with your sash, confer on him your authority, and he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. I will place on the key the house of David on his shoulder. Whatever door he opens will remain open. Whatever door he shuts will remain shut. I will fix him as a peg in a firm place and a seat of honor for his ancestral house. See, Jesus is making Peter this prime minister, this office that existed in the Davidic kingdom. See, Jesus is the rightful heir to the throne. He's the rightful king to this Davidic kingdom. And he's saying to Peter that he's going to give Peter, the rock on which he builds his church, his authority. He's going to give him the keys of his kingdom so that whatever he binds on earth is bound in heaven. Whatever door is open will remain open. Whatever door is shut will remain shut. There's this beautiful poetic continuity as we see from the Old Testament to the New Testament, that Jesus has been elected by Jesus himself to be his second in command, to have his very own authority, to hold the keys to Jesus' kingdom. This is a significant moment, and it's only Peter who received these keys of the kingdom. It's only Peter who was appointed to this very particular office. And just like the presidency, the prime minister, these are offices that have successors. That should Peter pass on, that he would elect someone else to fill his office, just like we see in the Davidic kingdom of the Old Testament. We see in Matthew chapter 10, it's Peter who is called the chief apostle, or the first among the apostles. It's Peter who's listed first almost always throughout the New Testament, Peter, James, and John. It's really interesting that Judas is listed almost always last. Peter listed first, Judas listed last. We see that Peter declared the first dogma of the church in Acts chapter 15 in the Council of Jerusalem. It was Peter who stood up to declare what was binding on the church. It was Peter who preached the gospel empowered by the Holy Spirit. At Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, Peter is mentioned 195 times in the New Testament. The next apostle is John with just 29. There is significance to Peter's role in the New Testament because Peter is the rock on which Jesus built the church. Peter alone was given the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and Peter was appointed to this office of papacy. We see even in the early Christian writings in the church fathers, we see that they affirmed what we believe today of Peter's primacy, that Peter was the rock, that Peter's successors had authority. We even see Clement of Rome, even before the 2nd century, we see the Corinthians are writing to Rome, to Clement of Rome, to the Pope, to resolve disputes. Now, why would they do this when they have the Apostle John, one of the original apostles, close by as a neighbor? Why would they write all the way to Rome? It's because they recognized their authority. This is what Christians have believed for 1,500 years. This is what was universally taught and accepted. And so to answer the question, why do we have a pope? Well, ultimately, because that's the way that Christ set it up. This is the gift that Christ gave to the church. It's not the Pope's job to change teaching or to come up with doctrine. It's the Pope's job to guard and protect the deposit of faith that Jude 1:3 tells us was once and for all handed down to the saints, so that we have a sure way to know truth, to come to the fullness of truth. And so, as we grow closer in our knowledge and our relationship with God, let's seek after the significance of all that the church has for us, so that we can be led on a deeper transformation and refinement on our journey to heaven.
We gather in your name. We've come here, Lord, to pray. Oh, meet us, lead us, God, we know you seek us. Conform us to your way. Won't you set us on fire? this place. Oh, feed us, sustain us, bread of life be in us. Transform us to your ways. Won't you set us on fire? Oh, 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 oh. In the name of the Father. Oh, 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 oh. In the name of the Son. Oh, 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 oh. In the name of the Spirit. Lord, we come, in whom we have been baptized, in whom we have your life. Oh, 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 oh. In the name of the Father. Oh, 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 oh. In the name of the Son. Oh, 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 oh. In the name of the Spirit. Yeah. Oh, 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 oh. In the name of the Father. Oh, oh, oh. In the name of the Son. Oh, oh, oh. In the name of the Spirit. Lord, we come. Lord, we come. Lord, we come. Lord, we come.
I'm very happy to present my greetings to Shalom Ministry and all the good work that you do around the world in fulfilling the dream of the Holy Father that all should hear the love of God. Thank you for your good work and those who support you. May these special days of new evangelization bless your operators, your administrators, and your benefactors. God bless you.
Shalom World, God's own channel.